Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Katy Spaulding. I have been a multi-sport athlete for my entire life, including now as an adult. I am a member of U.S. Center for Safe Sports Board of Directors and the Athlete Advisory Team. And I really got involved in the center because I had a largely very positive experience with sport. And I just believe that every athlete deserves to have a similar experience as I did. So we're going to go through some sort of ground rules and a couple of things to keep in mind, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, we appreciate everyone joining. Please know that this event is being recorded and will be posted on the center's YouTube channel and website after we're done. I also wanted to thank everyone who submitted questions for Juris in advance. We will have a live Q&A in the second half of the session, which we'll talk more about in a second. And we are looking forward to the opportunity to provide an update to our community here and to answer your questions. Before we begin, I wanted to start by saying that we won't be speaking to any specific cases. However, we may speak about the types of misconduct that happen in sports, including sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. So we encourage everyone who's on this call to take care of yourself. We do have the Army of Survivors providing a confidential space for those who may need it during the event, and the team's going to drop the link in there. Thank you very much. And then, as always, if you have experienced abuse or misconduct, or if you have reasonable suspicion of abuse or misconduct inflicted by someone in the U.S. Olympic or Paralympic movement, you can always make a report. Go to uscenterforsafesport.org/report. As for our time today, we're going to start with brief remarks from the CEO of U.S. Center for Safe Sport, followed by a Q&A session to address some of the pre-submitted questions. Like I said, if you didn't get a chance to submit a question in advance, there will be an opportunity for live questions later on. We are going to do our best to answer as many of your questions as we can from the pre-submitted list and then the live submissions. For the sake of efficiency, we've combined or shortened some of the pre-submitted questions. We may not be able to get to everything or everyone today, but if needed, the center is looking at hosting additional events like this to get your questions answered. And then finally, we ask that everyone maintain a safe and respectful atmosphere in this forum. We do reserve the right to remove anyone from the meeting who uses profanity, is intentionally disruptive to others, or shares information that could compromise claimant confidentiality in violation of the Safe Sport Code. So with that, I want to welcome CEO Juris Colón to share some highlights from 2024 and talk a little bit about what's ahead for the center in 2025.
Thank you so much, Katy, and thank you all for joining us for the first ever State of State Sport. There'll certainly be more of these. It's been almost 8 years since the center opened our doors, and we were the first to do so. So as an organization, we're paving the way for global safeguarding, and we really take that responsibility seriously. And so we hope that the lessons that we've learned, although they have been hard, can really help this new generation of athletes and safeguarding entities across the world. The center started with 3 staff members, a part-time investigator. We received reports from the very first day. In fact, I believe we almost received 300 that year. And so no one predicted what we saw that year, nor for the years to come. So it's definitely been a journey for the organization, for the Olympic and Paralympic movement, and most importantly, for athletes and survivors. It's been long. It's been full of ups and downs, twists and turns, starts and stops. But what was clear then and continues to be clear now is that the center's work is necessary. But not only do we need to exist, we need to thrive. And as CEO, my goal has always been to continuously adapt and learn as we evolve as the first organization in the world to do this work. And when I joined the center almost 6 years ago, I quickly saw what needed to be done. We needed reliable, independent funding. We needed to staff up if we were going to do what Congress, athletes, and the public expected us to do. Since then, the Empowering Olympic and Paralympic and Amateur Athletes Act was passed, which guaranteed much needed funding for the center. We've more than tripled in size with nearly 140 staff now. In fact, we added 27 staff just last year. We've established and updated, consistent safety policies for all sports within the Olympic and Paralympic movement, and we have demanded accountability from those who do harm in sport and those who enable them. Of course, though, I recognize that accountability is a two-way street. The center is also accountable to survivors, to athletes, the Olympic and Paralympic movement, and others with a vested interest in our success. And as sport continues to grow and people know that the center is a resource, the expectations and the volume of cases has also increased. On average, the center now receives more than 150 reports a week. This volume, in part, is why we overhauled our process last year to use what we've learned, streamline to become more efficient, communicate better and more regularly, and provide the information that organizations need to make good decisions. It's also why we've lobbied legislators on the Hill to provide clarity on the statute, to define participation, and increase the center's funding stream to meet the growing number of cases. But thriving isn't just about laws or process changes or money. It is about trust. And trust is hard to gain, but so very easy to lose. So we are working every day to build trust with the athletes that we serve. It's one of the reasons why I scheduled this meeting today. It's also why I'm headed to Indianapolis in a few days to meet with the Team USA Athletes Commission. It's why we further engaged the Army of Survivors. And it's why we've invested in strengthening the SafeSport Athlete Advisory Team, and many of whom are on the call today, so thank you. Building trust with athletes does take time, and it will take us showing up, and it will take us listening more than we're speaking. And I recognize that by the nature of our investigative work, that there will always be a level of disappointment or dissatisfaction by some. But if we want to build something worthwhile, we have to listen and we have to learn from that criticism. So whether someone felt that we should have implemented harsher sanctions, or they felt they were unfairly punished, or someone felt that we should have moved more quickly or come to a different decision, we are listening, because these stories, these reports, aren't just a tick or a data point. There is a person behind every single story in every single experience, and they have motivated us to be better and to provide more transparency of a process so you know what to expect. But it's not just motivation. Athlete feedback and your perspectives are raising the bar, demanding positive change. And the changes that we've made since we opened in 2017, to when I joined in 19, to those that we made just last year, and to those that we'll make in the future, are a result of your voices. One of the highlights of being CEO is that I get to talk to athletes from all walks of life and all levels of competition. I get the privilege of hearing their stories. I hear from athletes who finally have resolution and answers, survivors who've seen their coaches finally held accountable, and teams who have witnessed culture change in their clubs right in front of their eyes, as a result of reporting to the center. And we've heard from individuals who for years thought that there was no recourse, but found a path to justice through our processes, which doesn't have a statute of limitations. These are the quiet stories, but we're here for both. Now, before we get to the questions that we received, and thank you for those who've submitted them, we got quite a few, I'd like to give you an update on some of our key initiatives. First and foremost, I've talked a little bit about our process changes. Those changes were made in April of last year, and we really took a look at these changes to do a couple of things. One, we wanted to create efficiencies, so we streamlined our response and resolution and legal teams. We've hired new staff. I mentioned 27 in total across the organization last year, but we've also doubled the size of our legal team to speed up case reviews. And why that's important is if you've had a case or you've known a case or you were familiar with a case that may have gone through investigations, but the investigation part of it was finished, and then you were waiting for the investigative report to be completed and the sanctions to be revealed, that was a whole different team. And so we brought those teams together to really to streamline that process, and we're already seeing results from that. We've also enhanced training for the team. We've hired additional process navigators, including a bilingual Spanish speaker. If you have a case going through the center's process, I highly recommend that you connect with them. They are super helpful. We've also enhanced processes for minors because minors are different than adults. And so we've recognized that there might be more effective education-based paths to correcting their behavior rather than taking kids out of sport all the time, particularly for less severe behavior. We also have a specialized interview team that's trained in interviewing minors, and we also launched a youth sanctioning course last year. A lot of these changes have been incorporated into our SafeSport code, and this code sets clear rules, and it is what guides our investigation. Right now, we are in the middle of finalizing the next round of suggested code changes, and we'll be circulating those for feedback, including athletes and NGBs, in the next month or so you'll see that as well. On January 1st of this year, we released the 4th iteration of the minor athlete abuse prevention policies. And so this new version of the map really reflects our learnings and the changes in the movement. And the review of this was quite extensive, included engagement with stakeholders like the USOPC, the NGBs, athletes, and external experts across multiple fields, including abuse prevention. One of the things that we certainly are trying to do more of is engage stakeholders in processes and decision-making. And one of the most important groups of people are athletes. And so we are guided by the knowledge that they have, the learning that we have received from them, because their feedback is so critical to the changes and the work that we have moving forward. So we're trying to solicit feedback in a variety of ways. Most recently, last year, we released our 2nd annual athlete culture and climate survey. If you haven't taken a look at that, I would certainly recommend you do so. But it was really meant to, one, get a better understanding of athlete experiences, and also to help inform the broader abuse prevention work that the center is doing, particularly around our audits, our compliance, and our education work. And nearly 3,800 athletes, representing, I think, over almost 70 sports, took the survey last year. And a majority of our participants felt that they had a positive impact, that sport had a positive impact on their lives. But even still, 11% of those respondents, experience unwanted sexual conduct or behaviors. And 89% of those people never reported it. So we know that there's still a lot of work to do. When we looked at the culture and climate survey, we wanted to see what athletes were experiencing, but we also wanted to know how we could improve. And what was very clear is that athletes want better and more communication. And so this is one of the reasons why we're doing this forum. It's also why we're showing up at events. We're doing other meetings and really trying to engage athletes in different spaces to gather more information that's relevant to the work. And one of those things is really finally developing sport-specific educational content. And this is something that has been a request for quite some time. And so we're working towards that in addition to the complete revamp of our educational content. We've also added athletes to our SafeSport Athlete Advisory Team and our board for 2025. And so you'll see those announcements in the coming days and weeks. And so, one of the things that as we think about looking forward, right, there's so many things that the center has our eye on and certainly focus. Increased and ongoing efficiency is certainly one of them. We are also headed toward the 2026 games. We're preparing for Italy. We're also working with the LA Recs and Parks for the 2028 games because youth participation in sport is very critical to their plans, and we want to be a part of it. And safety is certainly integral to that. April marks, the 1 year since we rolled out the process changes we talked about. And so, in the coming months, we'll begin to analyze those, continue to make additional changes, seek additional feedback to see what's working sort of, and what's not working at all, and reevaluate. And we'll continue to do that annually throughout the investigative process because we do want to make sure that we are continuously improving. I also mentioned that we are focusing on our educational content. So right now, we're in the middle of a comprehensive review of our current content, particularly the modules and the SafeSport core training. So you'll see some updates in March, but with a larger scale overhaul coming in 2026. And this overhaul includes not only content, but also accessibility and access to educational training. And many of you have expressed interest in having this core trainings available in the palm of your hand, and we're working towards that with the technology that we have. And yes, we do think it will be a little bit shorter. With positive developments, though, also come a lot of challenges. First and foremost, we are seeing, again, 150 reports a week. And so there are new sports that are coming online. We expect lacrosse, football, cricket to be introduced ahead of the 28 games. And so we're preparing for that. And with new sports comes new athletes, new coaches, and you just know people who will make use of the center's resources. So we're certainly preparing for that as we walk into 2025. The other piece, and I think many of you are keeping track of this, is the Safer Sports for Athletes Act of 2024, introduced in December by Congresswoman Deborah Ross. The center supports aspects of this bill because a lot of it, frankly, is overdue. And I think that a lot of the pieces that are included in this bill will certainly strengthen athlete safety and safeguarding, and will put in measures that will help guide the organization as well. But we do have a lot of questions, really about the practicality of some of the provisions in the bill, and certainly how we'll fund them in the years to come, which is one of the reasons why I'm headed to DC in a couple of weeks. And I hope to get some face time with Congresswoman Ross while I'm there. And we'll do our best to keep the community informed as we move this through. Of course, the biggest challenge for the center right now, and certainly the elephant in the room, is the arrest of a former investigator. And this was devastating news for us, for the movement, for athletes, for survivors. It's just terrible. And so I wanted just to share with you what we know now, and this is ever evolving, and some of the things that we're doing in response to that. So first off, Jason Cressley was arrested in November for stealing money during a drug raid while he was a police officer. He was arrested again a few weeks ago, or actually 11 days ago, along with a current police officer on multiple felony and misdemeanor charges related to sexual assault. And all of these charges were based on allegations while he was a practicing law enforcement officer well before he came to the center. When we found out back in November, we quickly terminated him and began to look into his cases because we wanted to make sure that we were doing our due diligence. So we contracted with a third-party firm to audit his cases so that we can ensure fairness, adhere to the center's investigative process and protocols. And while we don't believe that he committed any wrongdoing while at the center, this independent audit is really important, and it's necessary given really the unprecedented nature of these allegations. We do expect to release a report when the audit is concluded. And so right now, we are connecting with relevant stakeholders, which includes consulting with experts in trauma-informed care to guide our approach to communicating with parties in the process, particularly those who interacted with him while he was here at the center. And many of those claimants have reached out to us already, and we will be in contact with them in the days and weeks to come as well. And we're also evaluating our screening and our hiring practices, of course. I'm so very angry about this. I'm disappointed. I'm sad. It was certainly unprecedented, certainly something that we will strive to never happen again, because it was a dark week for the center. But it certainly impacts just the trust that we are striving to build. And it's certainly difficult for our team, who is made up of, talented and really hardworking individuals and professionals who are committed to our mission and our values. And so this will not stop us from working to continue to improve. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Katy for some of the questions that we received ahead of time from you all. And we'll also, as she mentioned, save time for Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you, Therese. Appreciate it. So we're going to stick with this topic that you just brought up, the former investigator who was arrested. We received a couple of questions related to this. Can you talk more about SafeSport's background check process for hiring investigators and other staff, and then what changes the center might be making in future, considering what's happened?
Yeah, absolutely. We already had a fairly robust background screening and hiring process. First off, we certainly recruit for folks who have a knowledge base in this area. Second, We do a very thorough background check. We do screens, we do social media screens. We also check references. And every potential applicant that applies here at the center also goes through a number of interviews with team members across the organization to get different perspectives before we extend offers. And when it comes to background checks, this is something that we do annually, but we also monitor so that if anything pops up, we'll be aware of it. And so we've reached out to a number of other entities, like other background check companies and screeners and reference checkers, to see if there's something else that we can do or could do with our staff. And so, it is a little challenging right now because we have staff in, I believe, 32 states, that in each one of those states, of course, has different employment laws. So we're doing our best to kind of navigate around those, but there will be some changes coming. One of the things that we've already started to put in place is that we're adding a morals clause to our code of conduct, which was already pretty strict. And then I personally will begin to interview final candidates before we extend offers. So there's a lot of things that are happening and will continue to happen. We're still in the early stages of this, but I think it's going to make us stronger.
So sticking with this topic a little bit more, folks want to know what training investigators receive. And also, if a claimant has an issue with their investigator, are there steps that the center recommends that claimant take in order to address those concerns?
Yeah, so we'll take the first one around training. So in addition to onboarding, just to understand like how the center operates, what the SafeSport code is, things like that, we also have training specific to each staff member and department's role. For the investigators, that includes a whole host of things, everything from child forensic interviewing to secondary trauma to trauma-informed practices and interviewing. And we actually have someone internally who dedicates half of their time to training our investigative team to make sure that we're adhering to our own standard operating procedures, which I think is really critical, because if we can have all these pieces in place, but if we're not following them, then that's problematic. And so that's been a real focus of ours over the last year to really beef up that training. And so we'll certainly continue to add to that as we not only hire additional investigative staff on that team, but also as we learn new things around best practices. When it comes to reporting, if they have a concern, this is where we're not great. And so one of the things actually included in the Ross bill is a provision to have a feedback mechanism or a complaint process around investigation. So internally, we were already starting to think about how we could do that, whether that needs to be internal, if it needs to be external, and how that will be processed. But it is something that we will do. And right now, we're trying to figure out the details of that. So right now, it is complicated.
So the next question, the center repeatedly cites staffing shortages as a reason for the backlog of cases and the long delays. Can you speak to any concrete steps you've taken to help improve these sort of long delays in finishing these investigations?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things we've done. First we had to hire more people. So I mentioned we hired 27 staff last year alone. And so that doesn't include like transfers and from department to department. And so we also tripled the size of our legal team. And again, that's important because one of the things that we realized is that we just weren't as efficient as we could be from intake to investigation to finalizing report to sanctioning. And so we have streamlined those departments. So not only are they working together better, but some of the responsibilities that used to fall on the investigator's shoulders are now shifted over to our attorneys. And so they can move a lot faster and get through cases much more quickly and much more efficiently. We also, are prioritizing those cases that have been sitting. We actually issued a sanction on a case. I think it was last week. Last week's kind of a blur. It might have been the week before, but a case that had literally been with us for 5 years. If that case was reported to us today, that would never happen. And so we are really trying to, one, get through the cases that have been sitting, particularly those that we've had for more than 2 years, but while also trying to balance the cases that are coming in every day. And so our goal, right, is to resolve cases within a year. And so we're getting closer to that. But I think adding the staff, streamlining the processes, and really changing how we function internally is starting to do that. Now, of course, the more staff we have, the faster we'll get. And so we have plans to hire additional folks this year too.
We're talking a lot about staffing and budgets. So next question, a bit of a two-parter. So what is the CEO's yearly bonus based on? And how are you balancing salaries and the budget issues that are cited as a reason for the delays?
Sure. So my salary and my bonus structure is determined by the board of directors. And so the board determines that by a couple of factors. One, they benchmark salaries for similar sized organizations, in nonprofit organizations. They also, we also work together to develop key performance indicators, and they evaluate me annually, similar to any other performance review we do inside of the organization. In fact, that's happening right now. And so your second part of the question was, balancing salaries and the budget issues. That one has been challenging. And so, we are slowly adding new staff so that we can afford to pay them, right, fair wages. Because again, we also, as we're hiring people, we do want the best of the best. And we want to remain competitive. So not only we can recruit people to come to work for the center, but that we can retain them as well. And so we do have to balance that. And I think part of that is, diversifying our revenue across the organization. And I mentioned that, we certainly get funding from the USOPC. We continue to request additional dollars through the Keep Young Athletes Safe grant that we tend to receive every year. We've also expanded our fee for service business to enhance or to add additional dollars, and we've started fundraising because again, the majority of the dollars that come into the center are paid to the staff who work here. And so the more funds that we can bring in, the more staff we'll be able to hire, the faster we'll get.
So you mentioned this in some of your upfront comments. The center has opposed the Safer Sports for Athletes Act of 2024. Can you speak more to the specific objections that you guys have and how the center is working to meet the aims of the legislation?
It's a mouthful. So, we don't oppose it. There are a lot of good things that are included in that bill that I think are overdue. And are needed, specifically around providing advocates throughout the process. I think that would be certainly a benefit for anyone that's moving through the SafeSport process. We do have questions, though, about this and other aspects that are in the bill. For the advocates in particular, does it make sense for the center to provide that service, or does it make sense for an external organization to do that? And if so, what does that look like, right? So there's some practicality pieces that we've asked for clarity on, and we'll continue to ask for. But, a lot of these pieces of this bill, some of these things we requested. And so we're happy to see them and hope that it moves through the system. The biggest piece, though, of course, that we're very concerned about is that it would add a lot of stress on our current budget. And so we just need to figure out how we would go about, paying for these unfunded mandates. And so, again, I'm headed to DC. I'm there quite a bit, to really to help legislators understand our perspective and our questions and hopefully get this resolved, because I do think it's necessary.
We've talked a few times about the substantial growth and the number of cases that you all are fielding on a weekly basis now, and talked a little bit about budgets and funding. Does the center have a concrete plan to increase its funding? And how much more funding does the center even need?
Yeah, so we have a plan. It's execution. That's the challenge. I mentioned that, we have a revenue stream through access to our educational content, and that really has been the majority of the dollars raised for the organization. We are also, again, we've requested additional dollars coming through the Keep Young Athletes Safe grant. We've also built out our development team here so that we can start to fundraise, and whether that includes hosting events or soliciting corporate partnerships or other grant opportunities is something that we're looking at. But we do need to identify additional dollars, and I think the Ross bill also gives us an opportunity to address long-term funding, because currently the funding right now, one, does not address any sort of inflationary concern, which we all know is real, and it also doesn't account for the growth of sport, which is great, but it also adds more people to the jurisdiction of the center.
So we've talked a little bit about sort of the expansion of the response and resolution team, the legal team. Can you explain how the center plans to balance a focus on legal and procedural efficiency with the emotional needs of the survivors seeking justice?
Yeah, that is a constant balance for us, because we want to make sure it's fair. We want to make sure that our process is acknowledging and practicing due process. But we also know that this is hard. Nobody calls the Center for Safe Sport because they want to have a fun conversation. These are really difficult conversations to have. But we also want to make sure that everybody involved is treated equally and treated fair. So, we're constantly going back and forth on how we do that. And so, one of the things that we're really focused on, again, I think this streamlining the departments is really helpful, right, to understand so that we can understand the full breadth of the impact of the allegations. Really making sure that the staff is trauma informed and continues to receive training on that. And again, that's another component of the Ross bill that is included there. And so, I also adding the process navigators has really been helpful. Expanding that team has really been critical to people's not only understanding but also connection to support services if and when they need them. So we are trying to balance that. It is a constant balance for us, and we try to get it right all the time. Sometimes we don't, but again, learning from our mistakes and learning from some of those more difficult cases has been eye-opening.
You mentioned earlier, along with the process changes from April of last year, some changes to the minor process. We did receive a question. How are you protecting minor athletes from false accusations?
Yeah, so across the board, and including the Center for Safe Sport, the number of false allegations is very, very low. But we owe it to anyone who calls us with an allegation of abuse to follow up. It's important to note that we are only investigating cases that we are able to move forward on, right? So there has to be some sort of evidence or some sort of information that allows us to continue on with an investigation. It's also really important to note that making a false report, retaliation against people who make reports is a violation of the Safe Sport Code, and we do and will investigate that as well. In fact, we've also we've investigated and sanctioned people at the highest levels and for things like that.
You mentioned retaliation briefly. We did receive a question focused on this as well. What is the center's plan to address retaliation early to prevent snowballing effects in a claimant's community?
Yeah, so particularly for small communities, I know it can be challenging. First and foremost, we take retaliation super seriously because we don't want, the whole purpose of the center, right, is to make sport safer. And if you are in fear that you are going to lose your spot on the team or you're not going to be able to compete, that's a problem, which is why it's a violation of the code. And we further codified that in this last round of code revisions. But, shifting culture takes time. It's more long-term. We've certainly started to see some of that. But, what I would say is if you are experiencing retaliation or if you think that you might experience retaliation or you have questions about that, is to report that. The only way that we can address it is if it's reported. And, because we don't want anyone to fear that their ability to participate in sport is hindered.
So we just have about 5 minutes left, Therese, of the pre-submitted questions, and then just for the folks on the phone, we will move to the live Q&A after that. It's a bit of a longer one, but many coaches and athletes speed through the trainings. You mentioned they're a little longer. We're going to fix that. But very few people are educated on other aspects of the Safe Sport Code, like retaliation, abuse of the process, burden of proof. Will the center add information and education about their process in the mandated trainings, just so people know a little bit more about sort of everything?
Yeah, well, I thank you for whoever sent this question in. This is, I think, the first time that I've heard that people speed through our training. But the its short answer is yes, right? So right now we're in the middle of evaluating everything that's going to go into this new course. We can't squeeze everything into the core trainings, but we are looking at other ways to incorporate process around, what the responsibility is, particularly when it comes to reporting. What does the code say? What does retaliation look like? So not only developing additional content for a SafeSport core and the modules that many people take every year, but also identifying other ways for people to go back to those courses. And so one of the things that we have heard loud and clear is that once you're done with the training, it's there, it's done, right? You get your certificate. You can't go backwards. You can't go back and look at a module or redo an exercise to refresh your memory. And so part of this overhaul is not just content, it's about being able to put things into people's hands for more usable education. So if they do speed through and they're like, man, I wish I could remember what the course said about retaliation, they can go back and look at that. And so we're in the middle of doing that right now, and we'll be launching that in 2026. In addition to that, we're also looking at a number of other educational resources over the next several years that will be smaller, bite size, and will tackle some of these issues and the emerging issues that are coming up.
You mentioned really briefly working with some local organizations as we prep for the LA Olympics. How are you working to engage other local organizations to ensure they have the support that they need?
Yeah, so there are a lot of affiliate organizations to NGBs, and then even more people who kind of fall outside or sort of gray when it comes to the Olympic and Paralympic movement. So one, trying to define what that is really important. And I think the big piece for us is, what are the resources that we're developing that can only be used for NGBs or elite athletes? What can be used for local affiliates when you are dealing with youth sports or intramural sports, right? And you just, you're getting together on the weekends, right? And so we've actually produced a number of other resources that can be used. I would certainly encourage people to take a look at our parent toolkit that has a lot of information there for your parents that you're dealing with. And then also a lot of the resources that come out of our audit and compliance, our organizational development teams are really good there as well. And so this year, last year we started working on it. This year we'll start to have more listening sessions specifically with affiliated organizations to better understand like what your needs are and what is different between the resources that we provided already and what could be more helpful. And so this, I think, is going to be pivotal for us because the sport landscape is so fragmented. We're also hosting an event in September that will really speak to local affiliate organizations as well.
When we're talking about local organizations like this, just to clarify, we're talking, high school sports or club sports, ones that technically don't fall under the movement, but deal with the same sort of issues. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, if I had a map or an image of what the sport landscape is, it would just be a ball of just like strings everywhere, right? Because you've got Olympic and Paralympic sport, you've got college, high school, intramural, parks and rec, and everybody in between. And every national governing body is structured a little bit differently and captures different people. And so sometimes that can be challenging as well to understand whether or not you fall under the purview of the Center for State Sport. So we're working to clarify that as well. But yes, when we're thinking about local affiliate organizations, it is most of those groups minus like the high school and college sports. But there's certainly lessons to be learned and resources that we've developed that would be helpful for those groups as well. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about athletes, and everybody on this call, everybody who does this work is only in it to make sport safer.
Great, thank you. We're just going to close on one last question. So what are the best ways to be diligent and proactive for all of us in supporting athlete safety?
I mean, I think to what I just said, everybody has a role in this movement to play. And I think it's all of our responsibility to support athlete safety, whether that means, understanding how to report and respond and react to allegation of abuse misconduct, whether it is as a bystander and speaking up when you know or see something that just isn't right. Making sure that if you're running an organization that you have quality prevention policies, but not only that you have the policies, but that your people, your athletes, your coaches are abiding by them, and that there's clear accountability when they don't. I think all of those things sort of together ultimately lead to a safer sport environment. and there's something for everyone. The Center for State Sports certainly has a huge role to play, but we don't do that alone. We can't change culture of sport alone. And the work that I think that the governing bodies, local affiliated organizations, athlete groups, survivor groups have really honed in on the last 5 years are certainly contributing to that change in culture. And it's really nice to see.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jerice. I appreciate it. And thank you again to those of you who submitted questions. I wish we had a bit more time for to take others, but we are going to move to the live Q&A here. So bear with us. I believe it's been open. So if anyone does have any questions that you'd like to ask, you can go ahead and drop them into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. We'll try to take as many as we can for the next 20 minutes or so. So go right ahead. While we're waiting on folks to type in their questions, we talked a little bit, Jerice, about the LA Games and the Winter Games in 2026. What are your plans to enhance athlete safety at both of those?
Yeah, so we had the privilege of being on the ground in Paris, myself and members of my team, to actually see how athletes experience the games, and that has been incredibly helpful as we're developing content for future games and for just event and competition usage. For Milan, for LA, we will once again develop educational content for the volunteers on the ground so that they know what the rules are. So that they know what the rules are when engaging with Team USA athletes. And then, of course, for LA 28, we're working with the Rex and Park in LA to develop safer sport guidance and resources specifically for their staff and volunteers, because ultimately LA 28 wants to leave behind a legacy that is improving and enhancing youth sports.
Great. So we did receive a handful of questions. Thank you guys for submitting. Just a reminder, please be respectful. We haven't had any issues yet, but just continue to be respectful, and thank you. So a first question here, can you, Jerice, expand on the no statute of limitations around claims? What does that mean exactly?
Sure. So when the center was set up, we made the determination that if you experienced abuse before we opened, so let's say that, finally the Center for State Sports opened in 2017, but something happened in 2012. Well, the center didn't operate then, but you can still come to us and allow us to investigate the allegations of abuse. And so we really wanted to make sure that, one, we gave people proper time, because, as when it comes to allegations of sexual abuse and just survivors of sexual abuse and sexual assault, it takes time to process. You might not want to come to us immediately. You might not want to make a report in the first 7 years, which I think a lot of states have a 7-year law that basically prohibits you from making any claims afterwards. And so we felt that was really important to give people time and space to be able to make the reports they need to. And we apply that currently to not only sexual abuse, but also emotional and physical abuse. So it really just gives you time, and it gives claimants time, it gives witnesses time to provide information. And so I think that's been really helpful, particularly in some of these more historic allegations of abuse over the decades.
So a couple sort of similar questions. I hope you guys don't mind me paraphrasing, but talking about feedback mechanisms, if you're a claimant going through the process and there's sort of misconduct from an investigator or someone else that you interact with, what are some of the feedback mechanisms that you guys are working on? And then how do people report misconduct by staff?
Yeah, so that is something we're working on right now, and I can also see the questions as we're popping up.
Good. Okay, so you know which ones.
And I see there's a question around, it's vague and it seems like a talking point. It does seem vague and it does seem like a talking point because it's something that we've been wrestling with for so long. And so we started this process when it came to the feedback mechanism. First, we were looking at the intake process. Then we were looking at just the investigations. Then we were looking at the entire process. And so we continue to be stumped on how to do that. I think at this point, we have a better sense of how and where throughout the process we can provide that. It's also one of the reasons for internal anyway, we hired an ethics officer, right, to kind of fill that gap with inside of the organization. And so we're also looking at things like that for external as well. It has taken a long time. And too much time, but it's certainly something that, one, it's included in the Ross legislation. So, that's something that we are opposed to. And so internally, we're just trying to figure out how it will work. But I will tell you that as we make our way through this, and part of the process here and the rationale behind doing these sorts of forums is to keep you updated. We will update you on the progress of that as well.
So sort of a follow-up question that I want to make sure we're addressing here. We talked a little bit about abiding by the SafeSport code. Follow-up question to the last one, why aren't staff put under that code as well? He says law enforcement enforces the law, but also is accountable to that. Staff at the center should be the same, presumably.
Yeah, so we have, of course, a code of conduct, right, and a code of ethics. So in everything that you would see in the SafeSport code, it certainly applies to our people. Unfortunately, not a lot of police agencies across this country have things that are similar. And these are things that happened when he was a police officer. And so, we're certainly cooperating with law enforcement as they are continuing this investigation because it's ongoing. But at this point, the statute itself only gives us authority over the Olympic and Paralympic movement. So we're trying to do what we can to support that investigation, but also to make sure that we've got the internal structures in place so that if there is a report that needs to be made or an investigation that or something that is not that needs to be looked into of our own staff, that we do that. And I'll say that we have had when people make those claims, particularly through our ethics office, we do have an external party investigate those, similar to what we would do here at the center.
You mentioned earlier an update to the organization sort of internal code of conduct as well related to that, which I assume will sort of address that question.
Yeah, for sure. And we add we're adding the morals clause, things like that too as well.
Yeah. Thank you. So I know there's been a lot of work in the last year, just sort of in the role that I'm in. So this, I think, question is really helpful for folks to understand. SafeSport administratively closes the vast majority of their cases over which it claims jurisdiction, but you just stated that there were very low number of false accusations. Why are there so many cases shut down with a closure like this?
Yeah, so this has been certainly a contentious point for us for the last 2 years. It's also, honestly, it's what drove a lot of the changes that we made to our process because we were closing way too many cases through administrative closures. And so there's lots of different categories that fall into administrative closures, and they did then and they still do now. But we have shifted away from closing cases that way. I think early on, it was a way for us to sort of triage certain things. And so as we've gotten more mature, as we've gotten better at this work and hired more people, that is not the way that we operate any longer. And so we will do our best to investigate fully through an entire case, but sometimes there are going to be instances where we still have to administratively close a case based on a number of things. Maybe we can't find people who are involved with the case, but we want to keep it open for a little while while we figure that part out. Maybe someone is deceased. There might be some sort of hold, right, that's happening elsewhere. So it does give us the ability to do that, but it's something that we are really trying to get away from. And over the last year, we have used considerably less because, we heard from you all like that it didn't work. And so it didn't work for athletes. It didn't work for survivors. It didn't work for NGBs. It didn't work for anybody. And so it didn't make sense for us to continue doing it.
So shifting gears a little bit to answer some of the first questions that came in, what is the opportunity for SafeSport to support NGBs in cultural shifts beyond the education modules that you guys provide?
Yeah, I think that a lot of one of the good things about being in Denver, right, is that we're pretty close to Colorado Springs, where a lot of the NGBs are. We have regular meetings with NGBs, one with leadership, but also as we go through our compliance development work. And I think this is where a lot of the cultural shift can happen. When we started in 2017, well, in 2018, no, I'm sorry, 2019 is when we started doing audits. And so this was an opportunity for us to kind of take a look at, what policies NGBs had in place, and how they were being implemented across the board throughout the organization. And every year since, we've done those audits, and we've also added a compliance development team who works directly with NGBs. So every one of our compliance development coordinators has a group of NGBs that they work to problem solve, to help them identify issues that are culturally specific, and then to try to identify ways that we could correct them or put in processes that might ease that transition. So it's certainly something that is ongoing. I think a big part of it is also just, again, trying to learn what NGBs, what LAOs, what athletes and survivors are experiencing is super helpful. So again, it's a long process, but I think the more that we can keep in close communication, the more that we can develop educational resources specifically for your sport is going to be helpful. And the more that we can problem solve as things come up, because it's never a dull moment, and it's never a dull day at the Center for Safe Sport. And so there's always something that is new that we are able to kind of help navigate. And sometimes, we can navigate that in a way that works out for everyone. Sometimes not, but it's a work in progress.
There was a quick clarifying question. We ended in the pre-submitted questions talking a little bit about local organizations. Can you clarify your statement about safe sport and high school sports?
Yeah. So again, like the safe sport, the sport landscape, particularly youth sports landscape in the US, is all over the place. And so high school sports are going to be governed by like Department of Education. In most states, Parks and Rec might be governed by another entity. Intramural sports might not be governed by anybody. And it's sort of just like gobbledygook sometimes. And so, there are certain NGBs who have relationships with high schools. And so there's a limited sort of oversight and jurisdiction for the center over some of those athletes and coaches. But in general, the SafeSport Authorization Act that was passed in 2017 or 2018 rather, and then the Empowering Olympic and Paralympic Amateur Athletes Act of 2020 really codify, that the center can only have jurisdiction over organizations that fall within the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic movement. There has been conversation around changing that. There's not been any movement on that as of late, but certainly as Congress kind of focuses more on collegiate sports, I think that high school sports might kind of fall into the mix as well. So it's something that we're monitoring, but certainly not something that we have jurisdiction over at the moment. There are, however, in some states, places where you can report. Now we can probably drop that in chat as well.
On the topic of organizations and NGBs, another question here. How can the center hold NGBs more accountable for failing to meet their safe sport athlete safety obligations?
So, the couple things, right? I think the audit, of course, is the first place. And so this really is meant to get an understanding of what's working, what's not. And so, once we do our on-site audits, we provide a list of recommendations or things that you have to change by a certain time, and we work with NGBs to do that. Certainly as the USOPC is making decisions on certification, the Center for Safe Sport and other compliance issues are part of that. So that's certainly another level of accountability. We also have the ability to report NGBs to Congress for interference, which we have done a handful of times. And we've also sanctioned NGB leadership and staff over the years for not abiding by sort of the safe sport code. So I think those are sort of like the heavy-handed hammer type things that we can do. But I think a big part of it is really just better working relationship with the NGBs to help them identify how they can make changes and shifts and improvements. Because, I get that like resources are tight, particularly for a lot of our smaller NGBs. And so that can be challenging. And so the center does not want to be in the business of, killing sport, right? That is not our goal. We do want to make it better and we want to improve. And so that does mean working with NGBs, working with local affiliated organizations to help get them there.
We just have a few minutes left, Therese. Just for the folks on the line, we won't be able to get to all of your questions today. Thank you so much for submitting so many great ones. As I mentioned in the upfront, the center is looking at potentially doing more of these. So absolutely questions that they want to address. Going to move back to one of the first questions we received since you brought up sort of fundraising efforts. This person is concerned about the conflict of interest with SafeSport accepting donations and gifts from entities over which you have jurisdiction. So how are you dealing with that?
Oh, we would not accept gifts from entities that we have jurisdiction over. I think we might have missed this question in the, well, this is an issue that has come up a lot, is around the center receiving dollars from governing bodies. And so I just want to make it really clear also that the center does not bill, nor do we get money directly from NGBs. So the funds that we get from the center, particularly that 20 million that comes from the USOPC, comes directly from them. And the center doesn't have any say in how that's sort of divvied up. So great question. Certainly this is our first foray into development work and funds development. And so, we have not, we've not gotten or really gotten the opportunity to turn someone down yet. But we certainly would if there was a conflict of interest. It's the same sort of practice that we look at when we're bringing on board members, bringing on staff or SafeSport Athlete Advisory Team members as well.
Yeah, it does sound like there's some misinformation out there around what NGBs are required to do. Therese mentioned a question that we received in the upfront, and it was around requiring NGBs to pay a fee for investigations, which could encourage smaller NGBs to cover up abuse. But as you mentioned, NGBs aren't required to pay per investigation. So all right, moving on to another question, talking a little bit about investigations in the legal team. Since you've doubled the size of your legal team, when do you think we will see a decrease in wait times for legal review? Many cases have had their investigations over and are sitting on the desk for 8 or so months, is what this person says.
And those are the ones we're prioritizing, right? And so we just hired, I think we just did the onboarding for the last 2 or 3 attorneys on that team, maybe last month or maybe November, December. So we do expect those to get faster now that we've onboarded the staff, and we'll be hiring another as well. So the more that we can bring on those attorneys, those cases that have been sitting on the desk for 8 months, those cases that have been sitting for 2 years should start to move. It's hard to tell you a concrete date because while we're going through all the cases that we've had for some time, we still continue to get them, right? And so, we have to balance also the cases that are coming in, particularly those that require immediate attention, with the cases that we've had for some time. And so not a great answer. I recognize that, but it's certainly something that we're working through.
So you talked a little bit earlier about updates to educational modules. When are you planning to roll out the updated educational modules, and can you solicit public comments on their quality before making them official?
That's a good idea. Maybe. I can't see why we wouldn't do that. So we'll think about how we can do that. But we intend to send out, I think they're supposed to be published in early 2026. I have to get back to you on a specific month. But yeah, so we again, this is great because one of the things we want to do is just get more feedback. And so I think public comments, certainly we're going to get feedback from athletes as well, around content, will be super helpful. So we'll think about how we can solicit public comments for that, and for other things for that matter. So great question. Thank you.
Great. So some follow-up questions here that I think might be something that the center should address further around accepting gifts from entities over which you claim jurisdiction. So I think that the center can definitely follow up and look into that for the groups commenting on that. There's one last question which refers to me, so I feel like maybe we'll answer this. Why do board members have a requirement to contribute financially for their seat?
Oh, I thought you were going to answer it. Sorry.
Oh, I'm not answering it. I mean, yeah, you answer it. I'll add to it if you need.
Sorry. Yeah, so I mean, that is one, it's standard practice for all nonprofit organizations. We do not have a give or get policy, nor do we have a threshold to meet. So, we don't we don't solicit a lot of dollars from our board members. We do ask they give annually, but that could be as little as $1 a year. And so really that is, you know, just to show commitment to the organization. And also, as we are starting to solicit funds, particularly through grants, many of them require that you have 100% board giving. And so without that, we would not be eligible. Yeah.
Great. So we're right at time. Thank you so much, Therese, for all of the information you shared today, and thank you so much for everyone and all of the questions and comments that you added to the chat here. The team is going to take a look and pull some of those out and make sure that they're addressing them. And as I mentioned before, I think Therese and the SafeSport team are looking at potentially doing more sessions like this. So thank you so much, everyone. And as I mentioned, the recording will be available after this session as well on YouTube and on the website.
Awesome. Thanks for joining, everyone. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks.